Not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority, just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted or extremely agreeable or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues, and what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. Heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine. And the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well.
The elite are all about transcendence and living forever and the secrets of the universe, and they want to know all this. Some are good, some are bad, some are mixed, but the good ones don't ever want to organize. The bad, instead, are the ones that organize, because they lust after power. Powerful consciences don't want to dominate other people, they want to empower them, so they don't tend to get together until things are really late in the game. Then they come together. Evil is always defeated, because good is so much stronger. And we're on this planet, and Einstein's physics showed it, Maxwell's physics showed it, all of it, that there is at least 12 dimensions. And now that's why all the top scientists and billionaires are coming out saying it's a false hologram. It is artificial.
And it is an appalling thing that the privileged classes are more likely to disparage marriage, let's say. Do you know that names drift down the social hierarchy?
Huh. What? I haven't heard this before.
So influential upper class people will produce a name for their child, and then that name gets popularized all the way down the social hierarchy until it becomes passé, and becomes more and more common as it drifts down. So this influence that you're describing, you can measure it everywhere. They're the fashion leaders, they're on the cutting edge, and everyone imitates. When Francis Galton 150 years ago started studying, he thought about it as excellence, something like that. I mean, some of the IQ research came out of that. He started to measure people on a whole variety of different dimensions. But his conception of excellence, of superiority, let's say, wasn't so much cognitive capacity, the more differentiated sorts of things that we might measure today and associate with some degree of value: conscientiousness, creativity, intelligence. Galton, who was an English aristocrat, which is the reason I'm bringing this up, was at the forefront of that movement, and he believed, like most English aristocrats of his time, that England was a superior culture and that English aristocrats were the hallmark of English superiority, right? And so, but that superiority was fundamentally, I would say, moral. That the superiority that was being searched for wasn't economic, exactly. That the economic superiority was an indicator of the moral superiority. So that would be associated with something like moral purity and associated with disgust. Now, George Orwell talked about, because he was from relatively higher social status, I think he was upper middle class, but he said he had a visceral distaste of the working class. And he had to overcome that, and he did. He worked in restaurants and he worked in all sorts of jobs. He went to war. I mean, Orwell strove to overcome that visceral disgust. And disgust is, the opposite of disgust is purity, and that's associated with a kind of moral superiority. And so one of the ideas that your concept brings up is the notion that the central axis of social hierarchy is something like assumed moral superiority.
There's been an unparalleled increase in material prosperity not only among the rich, which you could complain about if you were concerned about inequality, but among the poorest people in the world. Like, we halved absolute material privation based on UN standards by 50% between the year 2000 and 2012. And The cynics say that's because we set the standard for material privation too low, which is $1.90 a day. But if you look at the curves that you can generate at levels of $3.80 a day or $7.60 a day, you see exactly the same thing happening. And you see rapid increases in economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa, like 7% growth rates, which are more typically characteristic, say, of China or India. And that's manifested in unbelievably positive statistical evidence, such as that suggesting that now the child mortality rate in Africa is the same as it was in Europe in 1952. And so the Marxists' original complaint was that, the rich were going to get richer and the poor were going to get poorer, and that could be laid at the feet of capitalism, just like the fact of hierarchy itself could be laid at the feet of capitalism. And it's clear that capitalism, although it does produce hierarchical inequality, just like every other system that we know of, it also produces wealth, and that wealth is actually being very effectively distributed to the people, perhaps not primarily to the people who most need it, but to the people who most need it in ways that are truly mattering. And so, to me, the entire structure of Marxism is anachronistic. The problem is no longer appropriately formulated, and the solution tends to be deadly, if counterproductive, if not deadly.
And the elites themselves believe they're racing, using human technology to try to take our best minds and build some type of breakaway civilization where they're going to merge with machines. Transcend and break away from the failed species that is man, which is kind of like a false transmission, because they're thinking what they are as ugly and bad, projecting onto themselves, instead of believing. No, it's a human test about building us up, and so Google set up 19 years ago. I knew about this before it was declassified. I'm just saying I have good sources. They want to build a giant artificial system, and Google believes the first artificial intelligence will be a supercomputer based on the neuron activities of the hive mind of humanity, with billions of people wired into the internet exchange.
Some of it still has to do with the innate human emotional response to inequality. When you walk down the street and you see a ruined alcoholic schizophrenic who's obviously suffering in 50 different dimensions, it's very difficult to feel positive about the state of humanity in the world. And it's very easy for a reflexive compassion to take over and say, well, wouldn't it be something if we could just retool society so that none of that was necessary? It must be someone's fault. It must be something that we're not doing right. And, there's some truth in that, because, of course, our systems could be better than they are. And it seems to me to be that unreflexive compassion that drives whatever residual attractiveness that Marxism still has, apart also from the darker possibility, which is that it really does appeal to the jealousy that's characteristic of people, and the envy, and which manifests itself as hatred for hierarchy on the basis that some people are doing better than me.